I'll never forget the moment I realized my own home was about to become a battleground. It started like any other exhausting morning after a grueling 12-hour overnight shift at Fairview General Hospital, where I work as a floor nurse. My mind was on one thing and one thing only: getting home, collapsing onto my couch, and grabbing a few precious hours of sleep before I had to do it all over again. I was completely drained, mentally and physically. A deep, dull ache spread from my lower back up to my shoulders, the kind of soreness only a nurse working long shifts would understand. But as I turned onto my quiet street in Ridgewood Estates, my exhaustion turned into pure frustration. Right there, smack in the middle of my driveway, sat a silver SUV. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of emergency. Maybe someone had car trouble and needed a place to pull over. But there was no note, no neighbor standing around looking guilty. No signs of distress, just that SUV as if it belonged there. I let out a tired sigh, already irritated by the lack of street parking in our neighborhood. Carefully, I found a spot on the curb, maneuvered my car in, and stepped out, my frustration simmering. Hoping this was just a simple mistake, I scribbled a quick, polite note. "Hi, this is private property. Please don't park here again. Thanks." I tucked it under the SUV's windshield wiper, shook my head, and trudged inside. My heart was pounding, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer annoyance of the situation. Inside, my 75-year-old father, Robert, was waiting. He had been staying with me for a few days, and he relied on my driveway's easy access to get in and out with his walker. The whole reason I kept my driveway clear was so I could help him move safely without struggling with street parking. I sank onto the couch, hoping this would be a one-time issue. Little did I know that SUV was just the beginning of something far more sinister. After finally getting a few hours of sleep, I woke up still groggy from my exhausting 12-hour night shift. The morning sun peeked through the blinds as I stretched, my body still aching. I had an important appointment to take my father, Robert, to his doctor, so I needed to make sure everything was in order. But when I glanced out the window, my stomach dropped. That silver SUV was still in my driveway. I grabbed my robe and hurried outside, hoping the driver had at least acknowledged my note. Instead, I found it crumpled into a ball and tossed into the bushes like trash. My heart pounded. This wasn't just ignorance, it was blatant disrespect. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. I wasn't the type to escalate things over a parking issue, but this wasn't just an inconvenience. My 75-year-old father needed clear access to the driveway so he could safely use his walker. This was no longer a minor annoyance. It was a serious problem. Determined to give the driver one last chance, I grabbed a pen and wrote another note, this time much firmer. "This is private property. Do not park here. Final warning." I slapped it onto the windshield, pressing it down hard. Surely this time they'd get the message. Or so I thought. The next morning I stepped outside, ready for a quick grocery run, and froze in my tracks. Not only was the SUV still parked in my driveway, but my final warning note had been ripped into shreds and scattered across the pavement. A wave of anger surged through me. My patience was gone. Who in their right mind would be this disrespectful? At this point, I had two choices: keep playing nice or find out who was behind this nonsense and deal with it directly. I chose the latter. The following morning, I woke up early and went outside, arms crossed, staring at the intruder vehicle. My mind raced with legal options. Could I tow it? Could I report it? That's when I saw her. Emerging from the house across the street was none other than Linda Whitmore, the newly elected HOA president. And judging by the smug look on her face, she knew exactly what she was doing. The moment Linda Whitmore stepped out of her house, I knew I was in for a headache. She had the classic HOA dictator look, a crisp white blouse, an angular blonde bob, and a scowl that looked like it had been permanently etched onto her face. I had heard the rumors from neighbors, stories about her ridiculous citations for grass being half an inch too tall, her habit of harassing homeowners over minor infractions, and her love for flexing HOA authority whenever she could. But up until now, she hadn't bothered me. That was about to change. She marched straight toward me, her eyes locked onto mine like a laser. The way she carried herself, head high, shoulders squared, screamed entitlement. "What are you doing near my car?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet morning air. I blinked, taken aback for a moment. Her car? This entire time, the SUV blocking my driveway belonged to her. I forced my voice to stay calm as I asked, "This is your SUV?" Linda crossed her arms, a smirk creeping onto her face. "Yes, it is. Street parking in this neighborhood is ridiculous, and I have important HOA business to attend to. So I use your driveway sometimes. It's not like you're using it constantly." I felt my jaw tighten. The sheer audacity of this woman. "You're parking on my property without permission," I said, my voice even but firm. "And you've ignored my notes. I have an elderly father who needs easy access." Linda snorted, rolling her eyes. "Look, I'm the HOA president. I know all the rules. You don't own this street." She jabbed a finger toward my driveway, as if that somehow proved her point. "Besides, if you were really that concerned, you would have spoken to me sooner." Heat rushed to my face. I had tried to talk to her, through my notes, which she had crumpled up and thrown away like garbage. I took a step forward, trying one last time to get through to her. "I just need you to respect my property. That's all I'm asking." Linda shrugged, completely unfazed. Then, without another word, she turned, climbed into her SUV, and slammed the door shut. Before I could say anything else, she reversed out of my driveway with a sharp squeal of her tires, nearly clipping my mailbox in the process. I stood there stunned as the reality of the situation sank in. This was the HOA president. This was the woman who controlled neighborhood regulations. And this wasn't over. For the next few days, Linda actually stayed away. I thought maybe, just maybe, she had realized I wasn't playing games. My dad was relieved. No more struggling to navigate the street just to get to the car. I let my guard down, believing that common sense had finally won. But peace never lasts for long. Less than a week later, I pulled into my street after another long shift at the hospital, and there it was again. The silver SUV back in my driveway. This time parked even more aggressively, practically blocking the ramp I had installed for my dad's walker. That was it. This wasn't just inconvenience anymore. This was war. I came home that evening after yet another exhausting 12-hour shift at Fairview General Hospital. My body aching, my mind clouded with fatigue. All I wanted was to park, step inside, and rest for a few hours before I had to do it all over again. But when I pulled onto my street, my stomach twisted into a tight knot of rage. Linda Whitmore's silver SUV was in my driveway again. This time she had parked even worse than before, angled so aggressively that she was completely blocking the ramp I had installed for my father's walker. If my dad had an emergency, if he needed to get out of the house quickly, we would have been stuck. That was the last straw. Furious, I stormed across the street, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't care that it was late. I didn't care that neighbors might hear. I pounded on Linda's door, my knuckles hitting the wood with sharp, deliberate force. A second later, her porch light flicked on and she opened the door, her face twisted in an expression that practically screamed, "You again?" "You blocked my dad's access ramp," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "He can't get out." Linda rolled her eyes, her stance dripping with condescension. "Your father can just walk around it. Let's be honest, you're making a huge deal out of nothing." My fist clenched at my sides. I forced myself to take a slow breath, counting to 3 in my head. "He's elderly. He uses a walker. That's not nothing. Move your car." She let out the most exaggerated sigh I had ever seen, acting as if I had just asked her to move a mountain. "Fine, but know this, since you keep harassing me, I can make your life very complicated." With that, she slammed the door in my face. A few minutes later, she finally moved her SUV, but I stood there staring at the ugly oil stains her car had left behind on my driveway. My stomach churned. That wasn't just a petty threat. She meant it, and she didn't waste time proving it. The next morning, my dad's home nurse arrived for a scheduled visit. We were in the living room going over his medications when I heard a loud thud outside. I rushed to the window, my gut telling me something was wrong. Linda was back. She was at my mailbox, adjusting something. My confusion quickly turned into alarm. I slipped outside, heart pounding, just in time to see a bright pink notice taped to my mailbox. It was an HOA violation. Apparently, I was being fined for storing hazardous materials in my driveway. I snatched the paper, scanning the ridiculous claim. The hazardous materials in question? the oil stains from her own SUV. I felt my blood boil. "You can't fine me for something you caused," I snapped, waving the notice in her direction. Linda just smirked. This wasn't just a power trip anymore. This was war. Linda stared me down, her lips curling into a smug smirk as she tapped the pink HOA citation with her manicured fingernail. "Watch me. As president, I can issue citations for any violation of neighborhood standards," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "An oily driveway definitely qualifies." I could hardly believe her audacity. "That oil is from your SUV leaking all over my driveway." "You're the one who caused it," I shot back, my hands tightening into fists. Linda dismissed me with a casual wave, like I was an annoying fly buzzing around her. "It's your property. You're responsible for keeping it clean. End of story. Fix it by next week, or you'll be fined." My hands shook with frustration. I wasn't just angry, I was furious. My father's home nurse had stepped outside, likely concerned by the tense exchange. She glanced between us, sensing the hostility. "Everything okay out here?" she asked carefully. Linda snapped her head around, shooting the nurse a glare before turning away without another word. Just like that, she pivoted on her heel and walked off, leaving me standing there with the ridiculous violation notice in my hand. It was humiliating. I felt cornered, outraged, and more than anything concerned about my father. He had enough stress on his plate already, and the last thing he needed was some power-hungry HOA president harassing us over nonsense. Enough was enough. I needed to know my rights. That afternoon, still fuming, I grabbed my phone and called my old college friend David Reynolds. He was a property attorney specializing in HOA disputes, and if anyone could tell me where I stood legally, it was him. He answered on the second ring, and after I filled him in on everything, there was a brief pause before he let out a low whistle of disbelief. "Wow, this is a direct trespassing issue, Michael. She has zero legal right to park in your driveway without your permission, HOA president or not. She's claiming she can fine me for the oil stains," I muttered, my grip tightening on my phone. "And she's threatening to make my life harder if I keep harassing her." David chuckled dryly. "HOAs don't have authority over private driveways. They can regulate neighborhood appearance, but they cannot override property laws. Also, if she's threatening you, that could qualify as harassment." I exhaled sharply, feeling a firelight inside me. I had been patient. I had left notes. I had tried to talk to her, and each time, she had escalated things further. "So what do I do?" I asked. David didn't hesitate. "Document everything. Take photos every time she parks there. Note the date, time, and any interactions. If she keeps this up, call a tow company. It's completely within your legal right as a homeowner." I clenched my jaw, the pieces falling into place. I had been too nice for too long. Linda wasn't going to stop until I put my foot down. The next time she parked in my driveway, I wouldn't be leaving another note. I wouldn't be knocking on her door. I would be making a phone call. This wasn't just about my property anymore. This was about standing my ground. I didn't have to wait long. Just a few days later, after a quick grocery run, I turned onto my street and felt my blood pressure spike instantly. There it was. Linda Whitmore's silver SUV parked dead center in my driveway like it belonged to her. Sunlight glinted off the hood as if mocking me. She had ignored the notes. She had ignored the confrontation. She had ignored the law. And now here she was again, blocking my property with absolute entitlement. My father's home health aide was scheduled to arrive in an hour, and I wasn't about to let Linda inconvenience him any longer. I pulled into a street parking spot, my hands tightening around the steering wheel. This was it. I reached for my phone, scrolled to the tow company's number, which was now saved on speed dial, and pressed call. A calm voice answered on the other end. "Yes, I have an unauthorized vehicle parked on my private driveway," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need it towed immediately." The dispatcher asked for my address, and as soon as I gave it, they assured me a truck would be there shortly, and they weren't kidding. Within 15 minutes, a large tow truck rumbled down my street, its engine a glorious sound of justice. I stepped outside, phone in hand, and pointed toward Linda's SUV like a victorious general surveying the battlefield. The driver took one look at the unauthorized vehicle and nodded. "Got it." Watching the tow truck hook up Linda's precious SUV was, quite frankly, therapeutic. As the hydraulic lift engaged, my heart pounded, not with guilt, but with pure satisfaction. I was done playing nice. 20 minutes later, the SUV was gone. I hovered by the window, half expecting Linda to come storming out the second she realized her car was missing. But nothing. For the first time in weeks, I finally breathed easy. Maybe, just maybe, this public humiliation would teach her a lesson. But of course, that was wishful thinking. Later that evening, I was sitting on my couch, finally unwinding with a drink in hand, when boom, 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 the violent pounding on my front door nearly made me spill my glass. Here we go. I set my drink down, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Linda Whitmore stood there, her face beet red, clutching her phone like a weapon. "You towed my car," she screeched, practically shaking with fury. I leaned casually against the doorframe, forcing myself to remain calm. "Yep, you parked in my driveway again." Linda's chest heaved, her finger trembling as she jabbed it toward me. "That was illegal," she shrieked. "I had important HOA documents in there. You can't just steal my car." I raised an eyebrow. "Illegal? No. You were trespassing. I warned you multiple times." Her nostrils flared, her entire body brimming with rage. "I am the HOA president," she spat. "I was on official—" Linda stood there fuming, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Her face was so red I half expected steam to start pouring from her ears. "You had no right," she screeched, her voice breaking with frustration. I exhaled sharply, keeping my stance firm. "And being HOA president means what? You get VIP parking in my driveway?" I let out a dry chuckle. "Newsflash, HOA rules don't override private property laws." Her mouth opened and closed, her mind scrambling for a counter-argument. I could practically see the gears turning, her desperation morphing into a new level of insanity. Then, like she had just come up with the perfect retaliation, she whipped out her phone. "Fine, I'm calling the police. You're harassing me," she declared, her hands shaking with rage as she dialed. I shrugged. "Go ahead, I'll wait." A part of me almost felt sorry for her, almost. She had backed herself into a corner and still thought she could get the upper hand. 15 tense minutes passed, then 2 patrol cars pulled up, and out stepped Officer Brian Mitchell and Officer Jessica Torres, both of whom I had seen patrolling the neighborhood before. Linda practically sprinted toward them like they were her personal backup team, her voice hitting a shrill pitch. "Officers, thank God you're here. He stole my car," she shrieked, jabbing a finger at me. "This is theft. He had it towed for no reason. I was just parked in his driveway because there's never enough street parking, and he's been harassing me." Officer Mitchell let out a long, tired sigh, already looking like he regretted being called to this mess. "Ma'am, slow down. What exactly happened?" Linda, still waving her arms dramatically, repeated her version of events, her tone laced with outrage. Then Officer Mitchell turned to me. "Sir, did you have the car towed?" I nodded, calmly pulling out my phone. "Yes, and I have proof." I swiped through my camera roll, showing them multiple photos of her SUV parked in my driveway on different days. "She's been trespassing on my property despite repeated warnings. She refused to move, so I called a tow truck. That's all there is to it." Officer Mitchell barely glanced at Linda before saying, "Ma'am, a driveway is private property. He had the legal right to remove unauthorized vehicles." The color drained from Linda's face, her expression twisting into pure disbelief. "No, that can't be right. I'm the HOA president." Officer Torres, looking just as exhausted as her partner, crossed her arms. "Ma'am, that doesn't give you the right to park on someone else's property." Linda's mouth opened as if to argue, but the officers weren't done. "If you want your car back, you'll need to pay the towing fee," Officer Mitchell added. Linda gasped so dramatically I thought she might actually faint. "Pay? You expect me to pay for this?" Officer Mitchell didn't even flinch. "That's how towing works." Linda's hands shook with fury. "This is a conspiracy," she shrieked. "You're taking his side." Officer Torres's patience finally snapped. "Ma'am, you called us for an illegal towing, but this was completely legal. If you make another false report, you could be charged." Linda sucked in a sharp breath, her face twisting with frustration and the horrifying realization that she had lost. Linda was desperate. Her breathing was ragged, her fists clenched so tightly that I thought she might actually throw something. She turned to Officer Mitchell, her voice trembling with outraged disbelief. So that's it? You're just going to let him get away with this? He should be arrested. She took a step forward, her face contorted in fury. What kind of cops are you? Do you even know who I am? I control this entire neighborhood. If I say someone is breaking the rules, you listen. Officer Mitchell raised an unimpressed eyebrow. Ma'am, the law doesn't care who you are. It's his driveway, his property, and his rights. His tone was firm, unwavering. I suggest you start reading the actual laws instead of trying to make them up. Linda shook with rage, her body tense with humiliation and fury. She turned to me, her eyes burning with unfiltered hatred. You'll pay for this. This isn't over. I smirked, folding my arms. Oh, I'm sure it's not. With a sharp huff, she stormed off, her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared into her house. Officer Mitchell and Officer Torres exchanged a knowing look before giving me a nod. You did everything by the book. If she keeps this up, just keep records and call us if it escalates. I thanked them as they left, finally enjoying the peace of a Linda-free driveway. Or so I thought. For about a week, Linda vanished. She avoided me entirely, though whenever we happened to be outside at the same time, she made sure to cast the dirtiest looks possible. I foolishly believed it was over. With my driveway finally clear, I refocused my energy on caring for my father. His surgery was coming up, and between that and my demanding shifts at Fairview General Hospital, I was exhausted. The last thing I needed was more HOA drama. But drama has a way of finding you when the other person craves conflict. One calm Saturday morning, I woke up early, planning to take Dad to a follow-up appointment. It was supposed to be an easy morning. I pulled back the curtains and my jaw dropped. Linda's SUV was back in my driveway, but this time she had company. A second car, a smaller white sedan, was parked directly behind her SUV, completely blocking me in. The nerve. I rushed outside, fury boiling inside me, but also a growing sense of concern. Dad's appointment was in 2 hours. I didn't have time for Linda's nonsense. I scanned the sedan. It wasn't hers. It must have belonged to a friend or a family member, someone she had recruited to help her make a statement. This wasn't just defiance anymore. This was escalation. And I was done playing games. Did she think my driveway was a communal parking lot? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. My father appeared in the doorway, leaning on his walker, his face filled with concern. Everything okay, son? I clenched my fists, forcing a calm tone. Linda's at it again, Dad. She parked 2 cars this time. He sighed, shaking his head. That woman has no respect. I placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, I'll handle it. I strode across the street and banged on Linda's door. No answer. I called out, even asked a neighbor if they'd seen her. Nothing. She was either deliberately ignoring me or genuinely not home. Either way, I had no time to wait. My father had an important appointment, and I refused to let Linda's pettiness disrupt his care. David's advice echoed in my head. You can legally tow any vehicle parked on your property without permission. So that's exactly what I did. I pulled out my phone and dialed the tow company. Hey, it's me again. This time, there are 2 unauthorized vehicles in my driveway. The dispatcher chuckled, clearly remembering my last call. 2 this time? Linda just doesn't learn, huh? We'll send 2 trucks right away. Within 30 minutes, the tow trucks rumbled down the street. The drivers shook their heads, amused at the sight of 2 cars blatantly blocking my driveway. They went straight to work, securing Linda's SUV first, then the sedan. As the tow trucks lifted the vehicles, a pang of nervousness hit me. Linda was going to lose it, but that didn't matter anymore. She had zero respect for my property, my father's condition, or basic decency. Enough was enough. As the tow trucks pulled away, I felt something new. Relief. Linda could try to spin this however she wanted, but the law was on my side. And then, like clockwork, her meltdown arrived, right on schedule. 2 hours later, I was helping his dad finish his physical therapy routine when the familiar sound of screeching tires shattered the calm. I glanced at the window just in time to see Linda practically sprinting up my driveway, her face twisted in pure rage, her phone pressed to her ear. I walked out onto the porch, bracing for impact. "Where is my car?" she shrieked. Linda was shaking with rage, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "You had my cars towed?" she screeched, spit flying from her lips. I remained calm, arms folded, my voice steady. "Yes, parking in my driveway is trespassing. I'm done playing nice." The look on her face was pure shock and fury, like no one had ever dared to stand up to her before. "How dare you?" she screamed. "I'm the HOA president. This is harassment." I barely reacted. "Call it whatever you want, but the law's on my side." Linda began pacing in circles, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her phone. She was muttering to herself, a mix of incoherent ranting and dramatic gasps. "I'm calling the cops," she declared, stabbing at her screen. "This is a personal attack. I'm being targeted. He's trying to ruin me." From the doorway, my father watched in quiet disbelief, shaking his head. Within 15 minutes, the same two officers from before arrived. Linda bolted toward them, waving her arms wildly, as if she had been a victim of a heinous crime. "Officers, he had my cars towed. Twice. This has to be illegal. Arrest him!" One of the officers, Officer Mitchell, let out an exhausted sigh, already over this nonsense. He turned to me. "Do you have pictures again?" Without a word, I held up my phone, scrolling through clear evidence of both cars parked in my private driveway, blocking me in. Officer Mitchell barely looked at Linda before saying, "Ma'am, as we've already explained, he's within his rights to tow unauthorized vehicles on his property." Linda let out a strangled cry, as if the world had personally betrayed her. "But I'm the HOA president." The second officer, Officer Torres, pinched the bridge of her nose, clearly exhausted. "Ma'am, that doesn't give you the right to park wherever you want." Linda began hyperventilating, flinging her arms as she shrieked about how I was ruining her life, how she would bury me in HOA fines, and how I would regret this forever. Meanwhile, the officers just looked like they wanted to finish their report and leave. I stood by, arms still folded, letting her fling her words like daggers. But then, the meltdown hit its peak. She suddenly realized both of her cars were already at the impound lot. Not only that, she would have to pay for both towing and storage fees. I had never seen someone so enraged. She practically shook with fury, her face bright red, her breathing erratic. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer, burning frustration that she had no power over the situation. The officers, in the most professional tone possible, told her once again, "Ma'am, there was no crime committed here. If you want your cars back, you'll need to pay the towing fees." Then they left, leaving Linda standing there in full meltdown mode. Her eyes locked onto me, her voice trembling with anger. "I hope you're happy," she spat, stepping closer. "You've made an enemy you can't handle." I stayed silent, heart pounding, every muscle tense. For a brief second, a small part of me felt sorry for her. The embarrassment she must have felt, the powerlessness of realizing she had lost this battle. But mostly, I felt exhausted. All I had done was defend my own property and my father's well-being. Then her phone rang. It was probably the impound lot calling about the fees. She glanced at the screen, her face contorting in pure frustration, curses spilling from her lips. Our eyes met one last time, and in them, I saw absolute rage, but also resignation. She started to say something else, but then bit her tongue, realizing she had no winning move left. With a sharp pivot, she stormed off my property, shoulders shaking with anger, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. I watched her retreat, her furious scowl burning itself into my memory, until she disappeared down the sidewalk. I inhaled a shaky breath, finally stepping back inside. My father placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, his eyes full of concern. I just shook my head, leaning against the wall as the adrenaline drained out of me. Linda's meltdown was as dramatic as expected, and though I knew this wouldn't be the last confrontation, I had won this round. She had taken a stand, and so had I. But this time, the law was on my side. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The lesson learned from this HOA nightmare, at its core, this story isn't just about a parking dispute. It's about boundaries, entitlement, and standing up for yourself. Linda Whitmore, like many power-hungry HOA presidents, thought she could bully, intimidate, and manipulate people into following her own rules, even when they went against the law. She believed that her title gave her unchecked authority, but reality proved otherwise. Property rights exist for a reason, and no matter how much influence someone claims to have, they don't have the power to override the law. The biggest takeaway from this experience is the importance of knowing your rights and enforcing them. Had I not sought legal advice, Linda would have continued trespassing and pushing her false authority. Too often, people avoid confrontation out of fear, but standing up for yourself doesn't mean engaging in unnecessary conflict. It means asserting your rights calmly and with evidence. I documented everything, remained patient, and when she refused to listen, I took legal action instead of resorting to emotion. Another critical lesson? Entitled people thrive on control, but only if you let them. The moment Linda realized she couldn't manipulate the situation anymore, she lost it. She went from arrogant and smug to desperate and powerless because, for once, she wasn't in control. That's why setting boundaries early is so important. People like Linda will push and push until you push back with real consequences. In the end, I learned that self-respect means refusing to be a doormat, and that the law exists to protect those who are willing to defend themselves. Entitlement only wins if you let it, and I refuse to let it win.